Pangea 3. I think in order to talk about what the exit was like and why it's interesting and some of the questions about challenges at time of exit, it's a little bit helpful to take you through a little bit about how we started and got to the exit, and that'll kind of put it in context. So my business partner and I started Pangea 3 in 2004, May 2004, right. So my last day at Office Tiger was May 30. My first day at Pangea 3 was June 1. So
you couldn't just
so
wait to start.
No, exactly. So people who are looking to raise money will be interested to know that we did research the first 6 months. We did a PowerPoint presentation, create a financial model, and we went out and raised money. So we did start to hire a couple of people, and we made a trip to India in October of 2004 to do our first round of recruiting. But by then we had already started to bring in seed capital money. In October, our recruiters interviewed 700 people. We met 150 people for 5 minutes each. We called back 40 for 20 minutes each, and we gave 20 offers. When we got 15 people, when we had no office, no company, just out of a hotel room, they took our offers and agreed to show up on February 1st. So on February 1st, we opened our doors. By then, we had probably raised 700,000. Our plan was to get to 1.5 million. We opened our doors in Nariman Point at Maker Chambers 5. Why did we do that? We did that because we wanted to give ourselves more credibility than we deserve, because who's going to let their kid come work for this startup that doesn't have an office? If you're in Nariman Point at Maker Chambers 5, that's better than anything north of Haji Ali for a lot of parents. So at least that time in 2004. Today, that's not true. But anyway, we did that. These people showed up on February 1st, 15 lawyers from top schools. Some came from places like Tri-Legal or other top law firms. And we taught them to basically engage in certain legal functions that are a high volume of nature in the US and European markets. By June of that year, we concluded our $1.5 million round with seed capital investors. Sunil Wadhwani, the co-CEO of iGate, was our lead investor. And we moved on from there. We included our group, our employees, in everything we were doing. So from day one, the 15 people knew exactly what was going on. They knew our numbers. They knew our targets. We used that group of 15, sat in a room off-site and decided what our goals for the year were going to be. They're the ones who said, by the end of the year, we want 1 million in revenue. By the end of the year, we want to have 50 mentions in the newspaper. We want to be on TV. We all want to be promoted, and we want a new office. That were their goals for the year. And so from day one, and they all had stock options, every single one of them from day one. So they were very vested in the journey from the beginning, and we did the same thing year after year as we moved on, and that'll be critical to, as I explain, what happens later. So we achieved all those objectives by the end of the financial year. So 3 extra months, but we got there. And then the next year we raised $4 million in a Series B round. We grew the company it got to maybe 50 by the end of the year. We grew the company to about 150 the next year. And then in 2007, we went and raised $7 million from Sequoia Capital. And that was 2007. And by then we were probably about maybe 300 people or so. And then we got to 2008, financial crisis. And everything went downhill. The company started to lose a lot of money. Really, we went to a point of a situation where I think a lot of people thought the company wouldn't survive, and a number of our investors were really not happy with where we were, as most people were with many companies in 2008. But we listened to a Sequoia Capital presentation in August of 2008. Which is famous. It's all over the internet. People all look at this presentation. They have like a big hunk of meat with a cleaver, and they have tombstones. And basically, their message was, if you're not profitable, just go home and forget about it. And They said, we're not funding any, no matter how good you are, we're not funding any of our portfolio companies unless you're making money. And all along, both at Office Tiger and at this company, the view was we will raise capital to continue to scale our business. We'll keep raising capital. We'll keep growing. Finally, the profits will come. But in August of 2008, we were spending $900,000 a month and doing about $600,000 in revenue. We were losing $300,000 a month. We probably had $1 million left, so that was 3 months. And we somehow saw this presentation and said, okay, that's it. We're going to get profitable. In 60 days, we turned the company profitable. We cut our expenses down to $600,000 a month. We were breaking even, and every time we had a spike in revenue, we were making money. And from there, we grew. By 2010, we were at a $30 million run rate with a 25% net profit margin. By then, we had 600 employees in Delhi and Mumbai. We were ranked for probably at that point 3 years in a row as the #1 LPO in the industry. We had 5 of the top 10 investment banks as our ongoing clients. We had another 20 of the Fortune 500 companies as our ongoing clients. And because we were doing mission critical legal work for them that could really destroy organizations if they failed, it was very important that the work was excellent and that they trusted the organization. Otherwise, their lawyers would have no business bringing the work here as opposed to doing it in-house there. So we get to 2010, we're doing well, everyone's feeling good, and our competitors start to raise $20 to $30 million each to do big things like start to form onshore centers in the United States or to build technology or buy technology that for us would have been very, very difficult to compete with and stay #1, unless we did the same thing. So we at that point had to decide, okay, either we're going to raise $20 to $30 million and do what our competitors are going to do, or we need to consider whether it's time to sell the company. And our Series B investors, who many of whom lost a lot of money in 2008 in other investments, were ready to get some cash. Some of them really needed the cash, and they were very interested in an exit. And because they had such a tough experience with the company in 2008, thought that we don't want to now risk what looks like a possible win to fluctuations in the market, maybe another downturn. At that time, 2010, no one was thinking that we're not necessarily going right back down. And so there was a strong desire to take a win and get some cash off the table for them. Sequoia, on the other hand, who had come in 2007, really liked what we were doing, and so did the Series B guys, but Sequoia believed we could become an IPO company. They thought we can shoot the moon, we can get there. We looked and felt like a company that could ultimately go public. They showed us comps of companies that they thought, look, these guys did it, you can do it. And they felt strongly that we should stick it out and build that organization. Our group decided that in order to keep everybody happy, so we talked this morning about how timing is really important and that the risk return has to be viewed in connection with how much time has passed. And so our Series A guys had been in for 6 years, Series B 5 years, and then Series C, it was about 3 years. And they weren't ready, right? But the other guys had felt 5 years, 6 years is enough time. If I can get a particular number, I feel really good about it. So we all agreed, if we can get $100 million for this business, we'll sell it. If we can't get $100 million for this business, we'll raise capital and we'll grow it to be an IPO company. And everybody was happy with that. And we decided that we were going to hire a banker. So we decided to look at bankers that really knew the ITES space, both in the US and in India. And we thought through, okay, who are the likely acquirers for us? They are ITES companies in India, the IT companies in India that might want to add a high margin BPO business or KPO business, or the BPOs who want to get into a high margin KPO business. And then there were certain people in the United States who we thought could be likely acquirers. But we had one party who had really paid attention to us for years, and that was Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters had visited us in 2006 when we were nothing, and they showed up literally from corporate, showed up in our office in Nariman Point because they were shocked that someone in India was asking for 100 Westlaw licenses. So why do you guys need 100 Westlaw licenses? Well, we need 100 Westlaw licenses because we're going to be 1,000 people and we're going to be doing all this research. And that's why we need 100 unlimited licenses, which no one in India had ever asked for. So they showed up and wanted to see what is happening. And they kept paying attention to us, so they really got to know our company over time. So we decided, and they visited every year. So in 2010, what we did was we said, look, we're going to market. We've hired William Blair, a US-based investment advisor. And we're going to go to the market. We're going to raise money, or we're going to sell the company. But you have an opportunity to buy this company first before we go to market. You make an offer. If it's the right offer, we'll sell you the company. Otherwise, we are going ahead and going to market. So they basically got to the number. And in fact, we hadn't actually hired the investment bank. We said we would hire the investment bank so that they would know that we were serious. And interestingly, we decided to hire an investment banker even though we had a signed term sheet from Thomson Reuters, right? We did that because we wanted to make sure that we could protect our management team and protect the value that we were going to generate for the shareholders. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't leave money on the table. So we went ahead and agreed to pay a fee to a banker even though we had already found the buyer and reached a deal price. What got us really comfortable with doing that deal, though, was not only that we got the number that made everyone feel comfortable. It was a 10x return for our lead in the seed, and it was 7 and 5 and 3 for others. What was really important to us was also what was going to happen to the other constituents. So again, this morning we talked a little bit about what about the employees, what about the clients, not just the shareholders, and what is going to happen to the company. Because to some extent, even though we're leaving, it's our legacy, right? So you want an organization that's going to take care of your employees. You want an organization that clients are going to feel good about, that you left them, you brought them in. They gave you their confidence. Now they should feel good about who the acquirer is. And with Thomson Reuters being a #1 name brand in the legal industry, we felt this is a perfect opportunity to make sure all constituents are taken care of. The clients were going to feel a lot better about working with Panjay 3 because of the credibility behind Thomson Reuters. The employees knew that now they get to be a part of a public company that could allow them to advance in their careers even further. And quite frankly, all constituents were really, really pleased with the result. And so that's how we reached that conclusion to go ahead and exit, even though there was a real solid interest and desire to consider building the company to go to, a 10 times bigger organization.
So internally, Sanjay, who was driving the exit?
So my business partner David Perla and I were really taking the lead on managing, and really I think that's the only way you can, right? Because you have your Series A group, your Series B group, your Series C group, who in some senses can be in conflict. In our case, there wasn't actually a lot of conflict, but in order to manage the relationships, we're the ones who have the strong relationships with each group to manage, let's reach a conclusion that everybody can be happy with. Yeah. So we led it, but then what we did was we used our executive chairman, our non-executive chairman, to play a little bit of a I'm the boss kind of role when we were having trouble negotiating issues, and there was one really hairy issue that we brought him in to really handle. And one of the reasons for bringing in a banker was to lead the relationship so we didn't have to mess up our relationship with the acquirer on negotiating hard points, because we had to work with them for 2 years thereafter.
Right. So and what was your communication strategy with your clients? Because I know it's always so delicate when you're exiting in full, and the clients begin to wonder, what will happen to their servicing us at a later point. And I know in your case it was Thomson Reuters, so you have really a good acquirer coming in, but for the benefit of others who may not have a brand name acquiring them, what is your kind of an advice?
Well, I think that, you certainly have risk, right? If you end up with an acquirer that doesn't necessarily have a brand that's appealing to your clients, the acquirer is the one who really has risk. You have a little bit of as an entrepreneur, you have some kind of a personal reputational risk with those clients, but the real risk is with the acquirer. But I think in terms of how you manage the communication, because you can't really you want to talk about how to talk to your employees. It's very different than how you're going to talk to your clients, right? Because you can't really talk about a deal before it's happened with your clients. And to go and start talking to them, well, there could be a transaction. That's also a really tough call. So I think that you can, and maybe with some key clients, you could say, listen,
you could sense them out.
We're going to have an acquisition here. We're going to be in for the long haul. This company is going to be intact. We're not selling ourselves to an organization who's going to change anything, and trust us. And yeah, I think that could work. But probably with a few key clients, I don't think you can go across 200 and accomplish that.
Right. And how would the communication change? In your case, you completely got out of the entity eventually, but where the promoter ends up staying and for a foreseeable period of time, how does that impact when you communicate with the clients? I know I'm going a little away from the topic, but I think it's really key.
So, I think even in our case where, we were sticking on for 2 years, that was enough time to be able to tell the clients, don't worry, we're here, right? That's enough time that they don't really need to worry about what's happening 3 years down the road. Right. So that was good enough. I'm not sure what you're going to say if you're leaving. If you're leaving the next day, you're leaving the next day, and it's a problem, right? It could be a problem.
No, because in most entrepreneurship situations, you and the company are one and the same. How hard, as much as hard you try to kind of separate those two persona, people end up saying, this is the company. So when you're exiting, how do the clients perceive it? How do you communicate to them?
So interestingly, I think that that's true in certain cases and not in others. Okay. So it's absolutely true when you're in a people business and you're a service organization where talent is what is the primary asset. I think the entrepreneurs are critical, and there's a lot of concern from an acquirer whether this organization is going to stay intact when the entrepreneurs move on or not. And that's the reason they wanted us, David and I, to be there for a minimum of 2 years to make sure that they had a good transition over 2 years and that they could really learn how we were running the business so they could take it over smoothly. But the same organization, when they buy product companies, they don't keep anybody.
Right.
Because they want the product. So they actually don't necessarily care about the entrepreneurs.
Right. And how beneficial it was to have your advisor advising you. I mean, they would have kind of navigated you through the hairpins and bends. So how did they really benefit you? I'm talking about the investment advisor.
So first of all, I would recommend to everybody to hire the best banker you can hire and pay the money, because they will earn their pay and more, and you will get more out of it. Inevitably, it is the buyer, the people who are responsible for doing the acquisition in any organization, whether it's the lawyer or the head of M&A or whoever it is to get the company for the best price. And if they can claw back something based on something they learn after they sign that term sheet, they will, because that's their job. And I think having a banker who really knows the ins and outs of transactions is really the way to make sure that you don't lose out in those situations, and also that you don't have a heart attack in the process.
Right.
And ruin your relationship with the other side. So I've seen situations where the entrepreneurs who got too involved with selling the organization ruin their relationship with the acquirer because those are difficult conversations. So we had a really, really tough conversation when we were selling Pangaea 3, but we let the bankers and our chairman handle it. We didn't get involved, and that issue was the Vodafone tax problem.
Right. And also, when it came to disclosures, did you yourself go through an introspection to look at the small nails and the bits and pieces and make sure that you disclosed as much as you could? Because eventually, when you're running the company for 2 years, you want to make sure that nothing comes up the board post the acquisition.
Yeah, well, it helps being lawyers. So my business partner and I are both lawyers. So
okay.
You can rest assured that we knew exactly what to disclose and how much, and pretty much the importance of disclosing absolutely everything and not being afraid. I think it's a big mistake for an entrepreneur at that stage to start convincing themselves that it's a good idea not to disclose things because they're afraid that maybe the deal won't go through.
Maybe it's a deal breaker.
You know, you need to actually have some faith. This company has decided they want the company. Realize that someone's career is at stake inside that company who's already spent all this money and time and effort across the organization to acquire your company. Now when you disclose something, they're not going to now suddenly say, oh, we made a mistake. That's not happening.
Right.
So disclose everything you can possibly disclose because you'll be much better off for it.
So it goes to the old IRS maxim, right? When in doubt, disclose.
Absolutely.
Okay. And how long did the acquisition, and who are the people from the acquirer side whom you interacted with?
So there was a head of the division that was buying the organization, so it was a head of legal, and he was the champion that at the company who convinced the organization to buy our company. And then there was the, one person from legal who was responsible for the deal, so an M&A lawyer.
Right.
And then there was also from an M&A business lead. And because Thomson Reuters is controlled by a family, all deals have to be approved by the family.
Right.
Not unlike some companies in other countries. So our deal ultimately went up to an executive committee, which included members of the family who had to be convinced that this was something good to do.
Okay. And how long did the acquisition process take?
So it's a very unusual situation, and again, it was all about tax. So we made this decision about going to Thomson Reuters and telling them it wasn't made up. It was true that, look, if you want to buy it, you have to buy it. Otherwise, we're going to market. But if you buy it, you have to close by December 30. And there was a reason for it. The reason was that there was a strong view at that time that the tax laws in the U.S. were going to change, and that potentially the capital gains tax rate in the U.S. was going to go up starting in the next calendar year. And because of that threat, and because we had a particular number and people said at this number we'll sell, they basically said at that number until December 30, because after December 30 we might have a much higher tax, and if this thing doesn't close on December 30, there's no renegotiating, it's just over. Oh. And so because of the Thanksgiving holiday at the end of November and the Christmas holiday and the New Year's holiday, the deal closed November 18th.
That is in a fantastic situation. And what are the typical issues that kind of come up during due diligence?
Questions. People start looking deeper into numbers. They start asking. They might ask more questions about revenue and stickiness of revenue, and
right.
If you have revenue that isn't part of your normalized revenue, then maybe they start to realize, oh, wait a minute, is this going to continue? How long will that continue? And okay, maybe we should be thinking of your revenue as a different number, and then you're negotiating.
And so that's what the revenue side. On the regulatory aspects, did due diligence questions come up? I'm sure they would have.
So especially in any regulated industry, particularly in legal, where there have been various questions over time whether the idea of legal outsourcing violates various laws
Export
in
laws.
India about the practice of law. So Thomson Reuters actually obtained a legal opinion from a top law firm in India about their view on whether we were engaged in the unauthorized practice of law and whether they thought that things could evolve in a negative fashion on the issue. So that definitely was important, but didn't end up being a hang-up, because honestly, by that time, the industry had become big enough that no one believed that anyone was going to do something to cause, 10,000 people to lose jobs in India, right? So that was not a big issue. The Vodafone tax case was a huge problem.
Oh,
Right.
in terms of the retrospective.
The idea that India can impose a tax when you sell a U.S. company, and that the U.S. shareholders will have to pay tax in India even though they never set foot in this country, and they can't get a credit in the U.S. for the taxes paid in India because the U.S. says you sold a U.S. company, so you don't get a credit, right? So you'd have to pay capital gains tax in both countries if that happens. And by the way, this is the legislation today. And if they don't clear it up, it is a huge problem today for everyone starting businesses with U.S. shareholders, that you can run the risk on exit of U.S. shareholders having to pay a 20% tax in India and a 20% tax in the U.S. with no relief.
In spite of having the DTA.
Because the DTA does not give you relief for when India wants to charge a tax on the sale of a U.S. company.
Interesting. And if you go back to those days, would you have done anything differently?
I would say largely no.
Okay.
Largely no. I think it really, really worked out. I don't think anyone could pick a better set of circumstances where everybody can be happy. Where you've got all your employees are thrilled to be part of the new organization. Your shareholders, all a Series A, B, and C, are happy with their exit number. Your clients feel great about being in the hands of the acquirer. We could have shot for a bigger number. David and I, we could have said, hey, look, let's go and make this a $200 million exit.
And then sell it.
But we could have diluted ourselves to such a point where we would have made no more money by getting to $200 million. And we could have ended up with an acquirer that clients and employees may not have been so happy about. So for us, it was a sure win all around that made no sense to do anything but go through.
Right. And so what's if you had to summarize everything in a nutshell for those entrepreneurs who are either enabling exits or taking out exits for themselves along with their investors, what would be one thing that you would tell them to be guided about?
I would say the one thing to think about as an entrepreneur is to realize that it's not like, first of all, it's not the end of your life, right? Many of the entrepreneurs, particularly the ones that are at a conference like this, are fairly young, and they shouldn't think of it as, we need to know this is our business. I mean, the reason you raised VC money in the first place was to get an exit at in some certain period of time. And to get to year 6 or 7 and then say, to say this is not good enough for us, we have to grow another 5 years and get to the next number. If you can have a win and you can make everybody happy, realize that you can go and start over and do it again, right? You don't have to say like, oh my God, this is it, it's over. And go ahead, take your win and move on and do it again.
And do it something different.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
One of my client is being acquired by his customer.
Oh.
A customer, and Now the tricky situation is I have to share financial with him. He is asking for all the information, how much money I am making, client-wise, product-wise, this thing. Now I am in a dilemma, what to share, what not to share. Because I don't want to reveal my margins. I am making good margins on that. How to deal with this situation?
Isn't it a chicken and an egg story?
Yeah.
Sandeep, you have
Yeah, I think it's always a difficult. I mean, this was the best case scenarios. I think the hard bits you didn't get from his story, which is, I think the scale of 0 to 100 it is 100. But yeah, disclosure is obviously a big issue because what happens is whenever a buyer is trying to buy something, he assumes that the seller will give him all relevant information. And it's the same set of information which the seller thinks what the buyer really wants is what he asks for. So there will always be a tension inherently. I mean, this is much more complicated because you have an existing relationship. So I think drawing that balance is always an issue because every piece of information has a value attached to it, and the information asymmetry will change the valuation. It can be the person can be a potential competitor, could be as a customer you can get insights which you don't want to give to the customer. So I think these are more kind of soft legal soft issues in terms of how far you want to go and how much you want to protect yourself from the, and for example, confidential information sharing is not protected by fiduciary duty. So when you share information, you may think that the confidentiality agreement is protecting you. It only protects you in a contractual manner. So you can sue the person and yes.
You mean it doesn't need renegotiation?
Yeah. Because too fat margin.
Gopal, how would you respond to this from an acquirer's perspective?
There are a lot of ways to handle this. Number one is you know this person already very well. So, and he's interested in you. So the first is that level of trust relationship where you're going to tell them, yes, I'm not going to share the last line item of this, number one. If a guy says, no, I'm very, very interested in knowing only that item and nothing else, then they're not serious about this business. So that's the first one. So if they are, second one is there's always ways and means of mixing data, reclassifying, doing all these things which are absolutely genuine. There's no engineering of data, but to make sure that you don't want to give away what you don't want to give away.
So you stick to your grounds.
You don't go and take a strong position. You put this data, and if they're really going to say, I want this, I want to know how much margin you make out of my account, then you have all the reasons to say, look, I cannot give you of any of my clients because you may not buy this company. Whenever you buy this company, you have all the data available to you whenever if it's applicable. So it's very easy to distinguish between whether they're really looking for that profitable margin they're going to squeeze you or not. If you're genuine, you'll always win.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience who might have questions? Yeah, go. Okay. So Gopal, from taking on from there, we will now have Gopal share with us an acquirer's perspective on the exit and how they kind of view this. Remember that the acquirer have their own sets of questions, their own sets of concerns, their own sets of how this will pan out, and it isn't every day that you get acquirers who share their experiences with you, and that's why we decided today we'll have Gopal here who will give the perspective from the other side of the river. So, Gopal, how does this would you like to kind of define this with a forward, and how do you want to do it?
Thanks. Let me make it as generic as possible. So it is not one set of rules or one species of what's called acquirers. Acquirers fall into many categories. We make it as generic as possible. We start with a little story here. I think it's post-lunch. There was a man in the village, an old man, who thought it makes sense for him to buy a cow. So he borrowed some money, he pledged his jewelry, borrowed some money, bought a cow, the intention that the cow will, he did all the calculation, 20 liters of milk every day, how much he's going to earn by selling the milk, And then the chance of a cow giving birth to another female calf is 50%. So he calculated all this cash flows, everything, and he made a right decision. He bought a cow. So his dairy farm multiplied from 1 cow, 2, 3, 4. It went on, maybe 4 or 5 cows. Then his son came up. He said, Dad, you are so successful. I want to really build on what you did. You are great. Okay, son, what do you want to do? He said, we have a lot of excess milk at home. You know, it doesn't hurt for me to have a little pet. So he said, okay, no problem. So he went around, and the dad warned him, you know, when you go to the shops in the cities, pets are very expensive. He says, no, I'll be very careful about that. So he walked around, he picked up a little kitten, which he could see in the village, and brought it home, and he said, Dad, I'm going to have this as my pet. So, you know, just 2 glasses of milk every day. Dad said, okay, go ahead, beta, enjoy karo. So the kitten grew up, became this big, and one day he realized it is not a kitten, it's a cub, tiger cub. This is the story of an exit now. Now, he's so emotionally attached with it, he can't get rid of it, and there is no exit route here. You can't just throw away tiger, it'll come back to you and kill you. And you have to feed it every day. And a stage came in when even 20 liters of milk, the cub, once it reached a particular height, it says, milk, no more, I want meat. So feed it with meat, loss of money. And then
Loss of asset.
Lot of asset. And then it started to kill a cow. The day you don't feed, it kills the cow and eats it. And the day you stop giving it a cow to eat, it's going to kill and eat you. This is where the issue is. Okay, leaving the jokes out there. See, from a perspective of a buyer, the basic point which you should never forget is the real value in any business comes from the service you give to your real consumer or a customer, and the money the consumer and customer gives you. That's the first point over there. When you run a business with an entrepreneur or a big corporation over there, it is only that revenue generation and growth which is the real growth. It is not the valuation of the company, it's not the multiple, it's not about market capitalization. This is number one. Second one, when does anyone sell anything? So this is another story which very interesting learning I had from talking to someone who really knew how to run the poultry farms. He said, the farmer calculates what is the value add of increase in weight per bird into the rupees per kg, and what do I spend in terms of my cost feeding and holding the bird. So there's a break even there. After a particular point, it doesn't make sense for me to keep the bird because it's going to eat more and not grow more. This is a time when it exits. Tell me, whom does he sell to? If the seller is going to look for the same criteria of weight increase, it's not going to work. So he has to go to find a seller who has got a very different business model based on which he's going to buy his produce, isn't it? So this is a story here. So when you really look at from a perspective of whether it is any acquirer, I would say I would put them into 3 buckets. One is something where the acquirer is very clear in terms of what he wants. I want to buy a company which is probably, 30, 40 crores turnover, or this is the strength it needs, and he's very, very clearly targeting this company. You could see a value in multiple reasons. One is, you could say, here's a competitor. I cannot fight him in the market. Let me buy and kill him. Could be one very strong logic for it. And let me do it when he's young and less expensive. It's cheaper for me to do this than fighting him out in the market. The second is, he say, here is some very exclusive technology or something, or customer base or something, which is going to multiply my value or what I'm doing. So these are 2-3 categories in which we clearly identified this is what I need. So I'll capture this bucket as something where, as a buyer, are you ready to go to a banker and say, look for a company which is fitting into 1, 2, 3. Most of the time, proposals you get do not fall into this category. And this is the easiest for any buyer to handle. If I have a clearly defined objective, my board and the promoters and all the stakeholders, probably 15, 20 of them will come into picture. All of them have agreed in principle, yes, I am willing to commit money to appoint a banker. Then it's very easy for the company to take this proposal through. It's a cakewalk. You only go and look for 1, 2, 3 and take the process. Process is common for all. Second is a case.
Meaning you set your filters.
You set your filter. You already set your filter and told others, look for a company like this. So what comes in automatically will flow through the filter. Right. It's very clear. The second case is when someone brings to you I sent a proposal. See, normally we have a lot of friends, investment bankers who always come and talk to you. Every 2 weeks, they'll come and talk to you on a phone, say, this is what it is, are you interested? This is the kind of thing, leads which come in through. No obligation basis. So sometimes you open up for the purpose of a relationship. Sometimes you are keen to look at it. And then you identify, oh, this is very interesting for the business. So this is when your spark occurs. This is something is very interesting for it. Let's work on it. So you go and work with your team, you work with your colleagues, and see, does it work? 80% chances that it will get thrown away, but 20% chance it works. But it goes to cold store, it may get opened up after 6 months to 1 year. Third, where most of the proposals land up is when it is unsolicited. You get something, and you just go through this, keep a relationship with your bankers, you go through it, you ask a few questions, and just dump it here. This is really what happens from buyer's perspective. So the key is only one. What is the risk? What is the return? And whatever the seller's side could come with answers to these questions, the better and faster the answer is, the chances of it happening is quicker.
So how does the process really work? Once you've crossed the stage of something coming into your radar that is kind of acceptable and is likely to go through, what's the next set of processes that come in?
The most important process, I would say, is building a consensus within the organization on the need of what you're doing. Now, different organizations work differently. Within the organization, at different times, you work differently. There are times where you will go jump on an opportunity and go close it. There are times where you really don't want this opportunity. It's not that important for you. This is a wrong time. So, is to build a consensus within your community is the most important thing.
Even within the acquirers?
Within the acquirers community. Now, it could be many people. It could involve informal discussion with the bankers. It could have informal discussion with the large shareholders, promoters, the board, and there are many things which go into this. I don't like the approach of this company. It's all bubbles. Most of the time, what comes in as a first level is all the greatly decorated stories which come in there, which when you look at it, you'll know immediately half of it is not true. It's just nice words and nice graphs. So within a few minutes, you'll know what you want is not there. It is very clear. So the first level is this, and just check on the both sides. You'll check on your side, check on the other side. Do you really think that this proposal is going to fly, or you think it's not going to fly? And the frontline person who deals with it, the senior person, is going to immediately make a decision. If it is going to fly, he takes it through. If it is not going to fly, he doesn't waste his time. It's killed straight away.
So is it a combination of gut and analysis, or out of feel?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a combination of data as well as the emotional or whatever the gut feel of how it goes to work. See, remember, there are two types of people. One is a set of people and organization, I'll put organizations as well, who make data-based decisions. They look at data first, and based on the data, they make decisions. But today, I'll tell you, most people, I'm sure even people who sit in this office here, in this room here, most of us, we fall into the trap of deciding first and taking data to justify it. So just reflect inside over there. First, when something comes in over there, I first take a decision. I want to buy this, or I want to take this forward. First, a decision. Then you look for all the pieces of data which is going to help you decide, helps you justify the decision. Now, that's where the catch is. You cannot say, I'll do this first and do this later. You have to do parallelly on both. You need to work on the softer sides. But I can tell you, there's a lot of things which are decided on the softer side than the data.
So in effect, you're saying that acquirers end up giving weightage more to the soft side in comparison to the data. Is that the right observation?
I would not compare these two sides. They're two different, but you need to address both of them. That's very clear. Now, there are many things which are very, very important where there is no measurability. We can argue about it, whether there's a measurement, there's a criteria or metrics, but I'll tell you there are many things where there's no metrics for the measurement. I'll give you one example. The most important thing from an acquirer's perspective is what is the style of management and what is the competency of the management. If a guy is saying he's going to make so much money, why is he selling? That's the first question I would ask. If you really have a conviction you're going to make so much money, why would you sell? No one sells, isn't it? If I'm going to make money, why would you sell? So there's a story behind it. There's a logic behind it. Now, can I work with the same set of management? Now, the guy who sold it to me normally would not like to work with me for a long term. Who's going to work that? So what am I buying is really the question coming. Am I buying a list of customers, 300 of them, who's going to merge with me? So in that case, I'm buying only customers. I know the process. I know run the business. It's only buying customers. The other case, I'm buying some assets. There may be some factories. There may be something else. There is some set of assets which I'm buying, which I know how to run. Or am I buying the set of management philosophies and principles which the current CEO is using and running? Is that the key? Or the technology the key? So if I'm very clear in terms of what I'm buying, it's easier to take a decision whether it's a database decision or it's going to be, but definitely the non-data decisions are equally important in such situations.
And of course, when you're acquiring different kinds of businesses, the parameters of acquisition are different for different kind of businesses. I mean, for a manufacturer, what would you pay? For a manufacturing acquisition, what would you pay what would you pay for versus a service acquisition? What would you pay for? Can you throw some light on that aspect?
You know, the most important thing for anyone who comes and says, let me buy it, is why should I buy it? Can I build it myself? That's the first point. And there are enough people in the organizations who have brought proposals to the board all the time saying that I want to expand, I want to build, I want to build, I want to build. And the board has always been saying, no, I don't want you to build this, I don't want you to build this. So all the time CEOs' difficulties have been that I want to grow something new, and I've been shown the hammer, you will not grow anything new, you will go only what is defined, and you'll only do what you really are doing. So that's the first question over there. Then you say, I'm going to acquire. From acquire, it's the same story as growing up a cub without realizing it's a tiger. See, small mistakes can really lead you into a lot of trouble. And I know several examples of people who have bought. Give you one small example of a different industry. Most of you are not there. So you go to Europe and buy a chemical plant. You can probably get it for free. You can get it for free today. Because the cost of dismantling a plant and cleaning up the site can run into $20–30 million. So there are many plants which are really not commercially competitive today. They're available. They're willing to be sold to someone who's going to give very nominal money and take it over there. So the biggest issue for a buyer is, am I buying something like this? And what do I do if it doesn't work? Can I exit? So the story of the perspective of buyer is no different when a PE buys a unit or a portion of the company and say, I will buy only when I know I can exit. So again, here, there are many groups, many companies which are buying not for selling, but buying for running. There's some who buy it for selling. So the perspective differs between them.
So you're saying that strategic investors also need to be mindful about an exit option if needed.
Absolutely. I think today's world is clearly, we are never going to have certainty in life, at least the rest of our life. So presence of an exit option is always something a positive in entity.
And also, how do you kind of firewall the acquisition from not eating into the mothership?
Good question. The key is, depends on who buys. If the buyer has a very high reputation and really cares for the reputation and believes what he says is true and whatever commitments he has given verbally, non-verbally, in writing, everything he stands up to that, there's no way you can firewall. So the most reputed names, highly reputed brands are very careful making an entry and do not attempt to do this firewall around it to keep it out. Because at the end of the day, reputation makes a big difference. So you don't want one particular small company of a particular major group failing and not paying his employees' salaries or not paying the suppliers the money. So it's clearly, you may talk about all the financial engineering options of doing that, and really is, if you are serious about entering into the business and if you're a big, if your group or company has a big brand, you'll never want to do that.
So you need to be really careful about what and whom you're acquiring, because it could damage the mothership as well.
Yeah, anything. It's just going to go certain. A small rat can sink a ship.
Oh.
So it's a question of how do we really handle it. So better not to let the rat enter the ship.
Once the proposals go beyond the first level of radar and kind of an overall okay, how does the process really work from an acquirer's perspective? I mean, are there set processes, or the processes differ from acquisition to acquisition? Or are there any broad processes that are followed?
Each one will be different, but I can just put it as sort of a generic model here. There's a one set of people who are going to work from both sides on the operating level. These are the guys who really understand the business, they understand the domain, they understand the financials, they understand the legal issues. They are the one who are really going to see how I'm going to run the business. They're the operating team. And if the operating team comes back and says that, look, this is not a good business, no one is going to buy that. So it's very clear. So there's a very, very powerful team which is going to sit through, and these guys need to look at everything. One area which normally is overlooked, things like the governance, things like the compliance levels, even to environmental health and safety, and the culture of the company, the quality, customer care, all these are very, very important here. Many of the entrepreneurs don't really care for this. They just think that everything is numbers and multiples. The second level which really works is the strategic level, which works with the bankers, with the lawyers, mostly external people who come in there, look at what's the right valuation. That's the second level which works. So they really don't get to the operation, they look at what is right. There's always a third level, which is the people who need to bless the deal, the real people who are going to sign the check. So this works at a different level. At all levels, you need to have a very high level of trust and relationship. If those don't happen, if there are cracks at any of the three levels, it just fails.
Do you have situations where things can just take a U-turn and go back? What do you see? What do you do with that situation? Do you still stick on and you say, there's a need to do a U-turn, I go back to the drawing board?
Happens all the time. It happens all the time. If someone says it's a one-way street, it is not one way. Every step you take is a potential U-turn.
Right. And how do you distinguish between acquisitions where you already have a relationship versus acquisitions which are coming out of the blue? I mean, what?
Sanjay said that very, very nicely over there. See, anytime dealing with someone whom you know, someone whom you trust, even if it is someone whom you don't trust, is much better than someone you do not know. So a known devil is definitely better. And second one which really works is when you know someone over a period of time, you slowly understand what they look for. It's much easier to have a dialogue and much easier to have a meaningful dialogue when you take through. But there's also a little danger there. The danger is if you're knowing someone for a period of 2-3 years, there's nothing you can hide.
How do you perceive when entrepreneurs who have other investors exiting and therefore you're coming in, and the entrepreneurs tend to stay on for a longer time? How do you view that differently than entrepreneurs who are exiting in 2 years, 3 years down the line? Which of these are you most comfortable with?
See, there are certain buyers who are really the CEOs who derive pleasure out of the power. They really want to run the business. There are some, I'm sure you noticed that. So the people who really want to run the business will want to get involved in it, will run the business. So you have to be clear about that. So will there be conflict? There will be conflict because no business can have two CEOs. If any business has two CEOs, one of them is really not. Now, there are some businesses where intention is not to run, the intention is to make it succeed and get the real financial value out of it. That's exactly, for investor, what does he know? What does he really need? The investor needs power or investor needs money? It needs money. But most investors will state that they need the money, but they need the power. That's an unexplained need. So the CEO or entrepreneur who's running the company needs to understand this. Now, if the CEO is smart enough to understand, yes, I need to engage him in a little power sharing arrangement, I'm willing to do that. And the CEO who's selling the business needs to understand that he was a CEO and promoter. So if you're a CEO and promoter, you obviously have much, much higher level of power than being a CEO or the promoter. So this is one big change the entrepreneur needs to undergo, is to say, I am no longer going to be in the same position as what I was yesterday. See, if that works, it works. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
So, Sesh,
Yeah, and the last one, what do you do when it falls apart, or how do you react when it falls apart?
If you think it is going to spring back, you do your best. If your gut feel tells you it is not going to work, forget and move on. There's nothing which you can do.
Thank you, Gopal, for your views on this. Very, very important for all of them to hear.
Thanks.
just some housekeeping. Sanjay has been here since the morning for this. He has engaged. There any specific questions only to Sanjay, we can take it now. Otherwise, Gopal is around. Maybe we are going to have the public market perspective right now. So post that, we can have a coffee break and chat with Gopal as well. But Sanjay would have to be leaving before that. So if there are any specific questions to Sanjay, we can have it now. Otherwise, we'll thank him and relieve him at this point. Anything specific to Sanjay? Okay. Great. Thanks, Sanjay. Very nice of you to have been here with us all day. Gopal, thank you very much also. But please do be available in the break. So we'll now have the public market exit perspective. Neeraj from WNS. Pramod, Career Point. Thank you very much. They will provide, the exit from public markets, obviously the best route that, PE investors look for. Please join us. You can have formal introduction.
Nice to meet you.
So, at this point, so my colleague will formally introduce the two, entrepreneurs on stage.
Mr. Neeraj Bhargava, founder, Zodius Capital Advisor. Neeraj sets the strategic directions for Zodius and plays active chairman on the board and board roles in its company. Prior to Zodius, Neeraj was a co-founder and CEO of WNS, managing partner of eVenture India, where he was also the first investor in Make My Trip, NetMagic, Customer Asset, and Mentorix, and also a partner at McKinsey & Company. Mr. Pramod Maheshwari is the chairman, managing director, and CEO of Career Point Infosystem Limited. He is the first generation entrepreneur and the key founder member of the company. Pramod has over 15 years of experience in developing and implementing training methodologies. He plays a major role in providing thought, leadership, and strategic guidance to the company, in addition to supervising the functional heads. He's a BTech degree holder from IIT Delhi. Sesh, stage is right.
This being the IPO session, we would also have Sandeep kind of asking the questions, because there are questions that have a legal background. So Sandeep, I'd like to have the pleasure of you asking the questions as well. Obviously, this is very different from on their experiences in taking their company public. It's a unique opportunity, and I think all of us should ask the right questions and help them to talk more and tell more about their experiences. Neeraj, do you want to preface this with anything that you would like to say?
Yeah, I thought it'd be a good idea to set the context a little bit in terms of where we were at WNS and why we ended up going public and some of the challenges we encountered. And I know it's a slightly different situation from Pramod, where we actually went public at NYSE, and that whole game, I think, is a lot different. So I think it's very interesting to hear from Pramod as well in terms of how it happened in India. I think also before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge what Raman said at the last session, is that it's very important for in any kind of exit situation to recognize that while you may have a lot to say about yourself in terms of what you've built, what your numbers are, what your valuation ought to be, at the end of the day, what matters is what the buyer wants. And I also have the privilege of having Ajay Bohora in this room, whose company we bought when I was at WNS. And I think it's less about, even in the public markets, it's less about what you're about. It's more about what the buyer of the stock or a buyer of a company views it from their perspective in terms of what will they get from it once they have that. And I think that sets the context for a lot of discussions around going public. So I think before I sort of get into the WNS story a little bit, I just want to talk a little bit about why should one even consider going public. And it's not been very fashionable the last 5 or 6 years because of the state of the markets. But I think there could be a new window opening with SEBI in particular making some noises about allowing companies to list abroad without necessarily having an Indian listing, and particularly for the digital businesses in this country, which are coming up very rapidly. The listing abroad becomes a very, very attractive option. And I think from an exit standpoint also, it's something that people should very actively consider. I think there are a few reasons to go public. Number one reason is that from the perspective of your investors, you probably will have a better recognition, maybe not in the short term, but a long-term recognition of your value if you're a public stock. So I think it's a pure value issue that as an entrepreneur, if you're thinking about, well, I got to maximize the value of my investors, and if I've got to also look at my own value, I think from that perspective, it's very important to consider that what is the relative picture you would have. And interestingly, especially in the US, what tends to happen, and it certainly happened to WNS as well, the moment you announce that you want to go public formally, you actually have buyers showing up at your door.
Buyers from the private market?
Acquirers show up on your door, and it's effectively making a statement you're in play, and people show up. And we had that situation as well, and we chose to go public, and the result was right in terms of we went public slightly more than the best value we got from an acquirer, and we had a pop which took us perhaps irrationally to almost 75% over our going public value in a very short amount of time. So therefore, the decision to go public from the perspective of the investor was justified. Our investor was making 21x return in 4 years, which I'm sure they weren't complaining. So it was a pretty good outcome from that perspective. I think so. One is a value issue. I think the second is the fact that you're able to brand yourself very differently. And certainly when we were operating, we debated whether we should go public in India or go abroad. And I think structurally we had the flexibility. But the reason we chose to go public in the US was that for us, as a service company servicing customers outside India, it was very important to be known in that country. And the fact that you have a public issue, you're mentioned everywhere, you get to be on TV and ring the bell and do all that good stuff. So I think from that perspective, it was really a branding event. And we used that to the hilt in the sense that every time we were up in a big contract against some bigger players, we were also able to say, look, we're a publicly traded company, $1 billion market cap. So I think from that perspective, it was a major branding event for us. And I think the third one, which is again extremely relevant, especially if you have a good business and something which will generate a lot of value, and if you're early in your industry to go public, which we certainly were, we were the first one, you actually can start using the value of your stock because you do get a pop if you're performing well. And at that point of time, if you're able to capitalize by using your stock or raising money to make acquisitions, that sort of explains a little bit about what's happening with WhatsApp and Facebook. It's not about how much WhatsApp is worth. It's also equally about how much Facebook is worth, that they can afford to pay $19 billion with a small amount of dilution or paying through cash. So I think a lot of it is about making sure that you are able to get that arbitrage in value, which if you can use to restructure your industry and make acquisitions and do something different, raise different kinds of capital, I think that gives you that flexibility as well. So I think that's sort of the reasons to do that. A little bit of our story, look, we started our company actually with a very small acquisition. It was few of us who teamed up with Warburg Pincus. We bought an asset which was $15 million in revenue. As we went further, we made about 9 acquisitions. A lot of organic growth as well, grew to literally $200 million in 4 years. Took the company public, excruciating process, 9 months of being grilled, learning what Sarbanes-Oxley meant and actually learning to love it in some ways because it helped me set my own company straight. We were a group of very cavalier people doing all kinds of very entrepreneurial things. And it was a growing up event where we had to, the best way I would put it is that, typically if you're studying in an Indian university, you're used to having, or an Indian school, you're used to having an annual exam which tells you everything about what you're all about. That's your annual audit in a private company. But if you are in a public company and following Sarbanes-Oxley, think of the annual exam happening every 3 months. So I think it just sets a very different discipline. I fortunately was at that point of time in a big company where there were a lot of people who could do the work. So I was very happy that going public was a way of disciplining the team and making sure everyone was very compliant with everything they needed to be. So I think from that perspective, the 9 months was pretty excruciating. We learned a lot from investment bankers because they taught us how to present ourselves a lot better. It, in fact, reverberated into how we talk to customers as well. And I think finally, that moment where you see your value of your years and years of hard work being sort of reflected in one number, and especially if it's a good number, I think that's an exhilarating moment that every entrepreneur should try to go through once in their lifetime. So I think from all that perspective, it was wonderful. I think the really important things that an entrepreneur should consider if they were to look at going public is one, back to my point which I made first, is what is it that investors are going to expect of me? And it will be about, performance. It will be about consistency. It will be about quality of management and communication. And on all those fronts, you have to be, you use a very good phrase, battle hardened. You have to be really tough on yourself and your team. You should not go public if you are not certain of your next 6 to 8 quarters being absolute total home runs, because once you have an early disaster, it's very difficult to recover from that. You also should not go public if you have a team that is not capable of rising to the occasion, and whether it's on communication or just fixing stuff every quarter. I'm not talking negatively, but sometimes you do have this frenzy in the 3rd month of a quarter that you're behind your numbers. You just got to get stuff done. I think that sort of commitment from your team and your confidence needs to be there. And I think most importantly, you need to get trained. You need to think about what is the best way to communicate with investors, what is the best way to manage my, my P&L, and in terms of what to emphasize at different points of time, whether it's revenue, growth, or profit. And I think learning, kind of getting into a situation where you're saying, look, a lot of the rules I've learned in the past are sort of gone. I'm going to learn again. I think that having that attitude is very important because, as you rightly said, you are naked. Everyone can see what you are. You have to disclose everything, especially if you're in a very professional market like the US. And you've got to basically stand up and deliver. So I think from that perspective, there are a lot of benefits. I want to repeat again that there is an exceptional opportunity coming now for digital companies which being allowed to list abroad. And I think there's an opportunity for us to see 30 or 40 companies list in the next 4 or 5 years. And that's something that'll be particularly exciting.
Pramod, from your perspective, how would you relate? Because while Neeraj did it in the markets of the US, you did it here. So how was the experience, and what do you share?
Sure. See, Indian market is no different from US market from investor perspectives. Like expectation of investors are the same. At the end of the day, they also want, a pop in their investment. See, ours is an education company, and, when you decide to go public, in fact, you need to see the business environment in your sector. That's very important. Because if you miss this boat, perhaps you will not be able to get the boat in another 4 or 5 years. So that's one very important aspect. And second, if you have investor already, either you have gone through some certain round of funding, you need to understand the, expectation of existing investor also. Whether you want to give them flexibility to exit, or whether you will allow them to exit at the time of your IPO. So in our case, post our investment, couple of round of investment, we realized that we should give flexibility to our investor to exit whenever they want to exit. And that is possible, perhaps, primarily through an IPO, because once you are a public listed company, your investor can decide the moment, the timing of the exit. So not necessarily, there is no burden on the promoter, entrepreneur to give exit to the existing investor because he already taken the company public. As Neeraj said that, there are many benefits of going public. Obviously, one is that your team become pretty disciplined to address, like you have to written the examination on quarterly basis, so your team is completely ready to understand the market expectations. A lot of compliances come in place. Visibility increases a lot. And our experience has been fantastic. Like, we took company public. At that time, education was one of the flavor in the market. And if you are first, or as Neeraj said, that if you are the early starter, then you get usually pop up, and then you can utilize the your stock to buy companies or to as an equity. So experience is fantastic. If you really want to take a company public in India, you have to start almost 1.5 years before. So you have to prepare your mind, you have to prepare your company, you have to prepare a lot of stuff, a lot of compliances required, a lot of filings required. You have to go through a complete due diligence process internally. You have to put all the system in place. So for any entrepreneurs, if he really wants to looking for an IPO for any reason, I think they should start almost 1.5 years before they really, looking forward to exit. So that's all.
So what really, so in your case, the exit was prompted by the fact that you wanted to give a liquidity option to your investors?
There are two aspects. When you look at your business, like once you have raised fund from your investors, there are two aspects which you have to consider. One, you have to obviously give return to your existing investors. And the second special thing is the timing. Like when your investor is expecting the exit, which is pretty critical, and many times the business come under pressure at the moment when the investor expect exit. They start asking, for exit, and if your business at that time is not in a shape to give them exit, then it really becomes pretty challenging. And a business is all about uncertainty, it is all about risk. So in our case, what I, like in case of CareerPoint, post all investment, we realized that our company is having visibility of growth for another 1 year, very clear visibility of, all the quarters, one. Second, we have clarity in respect, our system was in place, we were in growth path, so we decided that it's the right time to, go to public, where we can give opportunity to our investor to still remain invested or to exit, whichever way they want. And in our case, like no investor got exit, at the moment I'm IPO, so nobody was selling, everybody still remained invested in our company.
It's amazing. Neeraj, in your case, I know you dwelt upon this, but what was really the driver for you to give them a public market exit, point one, and why the United States?
Well, I'll answer the second one very quickly. I mean, when we assessed all three, London, India and US as options, and very clearly we found that investors in the US understood our story a lot better. We were the first company in our sector to go public, and there were other peers in the US, whereas in India, there was hardly anything that was existing. So to sell the BPO story was a lot easier, interestingly, in the US, even though the companies were mushrooming here. So that was one thing. And, well, quite obviously that reflected in multiples and valuations and those sort of considerations there. I think the second most important thing was that our customers were there. And for us to make a statement in the market where we were competing for business was extremely important. Life made our life very difficult. Living in India and constantly meeting investors once every quarter was harder. But that aside, I think at the end of the day, when we looked at both the recognition of value and secondly the branding that it gave us in the market where it mattered most to us, the choice was very clear. I think the other things is just very candidly, from an investor standpoint, there are just too many lock-ins and other considerations here. I mean, people don't even know what the word promoter means in the US. So there's very straightforward lock-ins of 6 months or 12 months, depending on the risk of the situation. And everyone can sell. And yes, there are issues with CEOs selling stock and management selling stocks, and you have to do it in a systematic manner and in a disciplined manner. But there are no lock-ins that are significant. And from the investor standpoint also, it was very flexible. And finally, I think there's another very important point is that if there's a venture or a private equity investor that has to exit through the sale of the company after it has gone public, it's, again, extremely tiresome to do that in India. You still spend, you still hear of stories of Emphasis stock being mopped up or when Citi bought something,
mopped up by other players.
Well, it just takes too long to, mop up all the stock and actually convert something to private. And going private is a very viable option after you've gone public as well. And many people do that outside. So just the difficulty of doing those sort of things here also was a consideration for us.
So the ease of doing the public issue versus the compliance after the public issue was something that you weighed when you took the decision.
No, I think as Pramod alluded to that also, at the end of the day, the challenge is the same everywhere. You got to satisfy the investors and you got to defend your value and defend your performance once every quarter. So I think that is the there. So, the process of going public, other than the geographical difference, and we had professional bankers that were very well trained and they did very well with us. So I don't think the ease of going public was, I think preparation was harder because of various compliances thing, but ease of going public, I would say, would be comparable. I think it's an issue of what happens after the exit. I mean, that clearly our investors were not comfortable with the lock-in. And we ourselves, as management, were not comfortable with the notion that if we ever had to take this private or sell the public company, it would be, a lot of global buyers are put off by the fact that they have to buy an Indian listed stock. So it just gave us less flexibility. And finally, if you have to make acquisitions, you need less approvals as well if you're listed there as opposed to listed here.
Also, if you could share with us, how you would structure the whole thing for an Indian company to list in the US, given the restrictions.
So as a rule, and we do that in Zodius as well, we try to not have our parent company in India. And even at eVentures, when I was there, we funded Make My Trip. I mean, the reason why Make My Trip was able to go abroad was we had the foresight at that time to not register the company in India. We also are very fortunate that most of the businesses I've been involved in have had global setups. So it is possible to kind of register the company outside because of the fact that you actually do have an operation outside. And we've done with that with every single company of Zodius today. There's not a single one of our companies where the parent is in India because we want that flexibility. And the same was the case with WNS, where it was never headquartered in India. It was headquartered in Jersey Island with a structure that led to India, UK, and the US. And the way we set up the structure, it was very flexible. We could go public anywhere.
Would you like to dwell on some legal perspectives during the IPO? What we may expect to go public without listing India? One, layman's understanding, this is meant as a short-term allowed thing. Is there a permanency to this, or what is the thinking there? That would be very interesting.
So, for those of you who don't know about around October and November, government and SEBI have permitted direct listing abroad even without being listed in India. And it does seem to be a short-term window. There's specifically talks of a 2-year window. And there are lots of ifs and buts, so it's not as straightforward as it sounds. You need to have almost a complete set of filings with SEBI simultaneously. So you have to virtually comply with Indian disclosure laws. You need to follow Indian money laundering and anti-money laundering laws. The entire FDI policy applies, not just is it considered as FDI, but even if your sector is 100% automatic FDI approved, you still have a cap of 51% if you do this. There are restrictions on downstream investments, etc. So lots of ifs and buts. It's not as straightforward as just, for instance, for him, he just had a company listed abroad. And it does seem like a 2-year window. So what happens after 2 years they withdraw it? What happens to the people who listed? Do they have to kind of do something which is unfavorable for the investors? Presumably not, but again, it's a question mark. So I think that's one thing. The second thing which you mentioned was also an important point, which is why you would want to go list abroad would be in India, going out or going private transaction is virtually impossible. If you're a listed company, you to go through a reverse book building measure, and it ends up being extremely expensive if at all it is possible in any realistic manner. Which, of course, the US is the other extreme. It's kind of, you get a check in your mail saying your shares have been bought out too bad based on a fair valuation. So I think clearly we have the two extremes. It's obviously been a really bad and rocky market last several years. I mean, somebody told me today that the Sensex has hit a new high today. And that's like, what, 21,000, which is something, yeah. And that was, in 2007, it was 21,000. So adjusted for inflation, you've lost a hell of a lot of money.
Adjusted for dollars, you've lost a lot more.
Yes. Number two. And number three, if you look at mid caps and small caps, I mean, it's been a real bloodbath. I know there are at least several dozen companies where the liquid cash in the company is more than the market cap of the company. It's almost like absurd levels of valuation. So these are brutal times if you want to exit in the Indian markets. And unfortunately for the foreign investors, most of the investments happened in 2006 and 2007 when we are in the clearly bubble territory. So it's a horrible time right now to exit, but it's probably a good time to invest these days. Having said that, I mean, just kind of couple of 2 or 3 legal issues which I'll just highlight. For a public company, of course, lots of every misstep here, it's kind of moving from a more simplistic 2-dimensional arena, you're moving to a 3-dimensional or much more complex environment in which you can much more easily make missteps. So you have all these corporate governance regulations, insider trading regulations, almost pretty much every company we look at which is kind of either doing a public takeover or any other kind of public transaction, we end up seeing dozens of violations, not just 2 or 3, which have occurred involuntarily in the past 10 years. And they become rather major issues. And I mean, pretty much nobody can really master it. I mean, Omkar Goswami was supposed to be one of the top corporate governance gurus in the country. He sold shares in Infosys in a blackout window. He was fined and he was reported to the SEC for this. Again, after 6 months, he did the same thing. So it's not easy being easy running a listed company. In addition, lots of other complications come in, at least from the Indian perspective. We had the put and call problem, which existed in not just listed companies, but even the unlisted space, which has now been rationalized. I'll talk about the other issues in terms of the complications, but I think this kind of sets the stage for the product.
Smaller businesses that are ready, like WNS kind of thing. What SME exchange phenomenon are we seeing the OTCI all over again? Are you more optimistic?
Okay, so I'm one of the few non-optimistic people about the SME exchange. Okay, great. So there are 2 of us, which is nice. Everybody I speak to is very, very gung-ho about the SME exchange. And the reason is actually much more problematic than the fact that OTCI went bust. It started, 92, 93, before the NSE. And I don't think India is ready for an SME market, for the simple reason you will, even in the private equity space, 90-95% of all companies will go bust, right? Only those few 5 or 10% of the companies actually become wildly successful and return money to the investor. Imagine a scenario in which you don't have these people who sit on boards and actually improve the company, but you list these companies. And I think you're looking at lots of bust-ups, genuine bust-ups. If you had fraud, it's probably going to be much more than 95% of all these small companies are going to go bust after they get listed. And I think there will be a lot of hullabaloo. People say there is fraud when there is just failure. And I think given Indian people's appetite for risk, which is already, people have lost so much money over the last 7, 8 or 10 years, people assume this is kind of a junk market where everybody's a fraudster, which is probably not even true. So I see the market succeeding in the short term. I mean, I believe 34 companies have listed on the BAC's segment, and they're all doing well apparently. Yes. So apparently they are doing well. So in the short term, I think it's okay. But once you see a kind of substantial downturn and with the volatility which comes with it, I don't see a great future for the SME segment. Though they have put a term saying that investors can't invest less than 1 lakh rupees. So they've got, presumably richer people are smarter and therefore, they've put this restriction on investors.
I know it's a slightly connected view is, from my experience, I've heard people talking about the AIM exchange in London the same way as we speak in, of the SME exchange in India. I've heard about people speaking about the small board both in Singapore and in Hong Kong in the same fashion as we speak in. I mean, if you look at, I did for a while, I did an analysis of the stock volumes for these small board exchanges in Hong Kong and Singapore, because we were planning to do that at one point. And I realized that they have the same issues of illiquidity as some of the SME exchanges around the world, and what would happen to India too. So I think essentially SME exchanges all over the world have always had these questions.
Many of them actually have a stigma attached.
They have a stigma attached, yes.
On the OTC or NASDAQ,
Right.
even AIM, lots of focus companies are there. So I think there's a reverse of what WNS would have faced in terms of the brand value. It should be higher. You can't have small banks. You can't have 50 lakh companies in this tool.
I mean, if you talk to any merchant banker and they will say, if you're less than 100 crores in turnover, don't even look at the 100 crores and like 1,000 crores of market cap. Don't even look at this big board. I mean, look at alternatives.
There's one very interesting example, which is eClerks, which at the time they listed. I knew those guys a little bit at that time as well. I was quite bewildered because in all our experience that managing quarter by quarter, you need to be of a certain size to maintain some sort of sanity with volatility of small transactions. What I meant was that if sometimes analysts read too much into you missing your number by 1% or 1 cent for your earning or things like that, and in even a larger business that we were, $300 or $400 million, small transactions sometimes made a lot of difference to us, whether we were meeting our quarter's numbers or not. And from that perspective, if you viewed eClerks, it was listed, I think, at about $20 or $25 million in revenue. I mean, having said that, it worked very well for them because there's been, remarkable resilience in their growth. They had they actually grew it very consistently, had extraordinarily good bottom lines, and they've managed to pull that off. So I think it's, to me, what learning from that is that, look, I think there is a certain minimum threshold required, and whether 100 crores or $100 million, whichever way you want to see it, right. there is some way to think about it. But the most important thing is also, actually two important things. One, you need to be very clear that you have the ability to sustain the next 6 to 8 quarters or even beyond that of the level of growth and profitability expectations that their market has. And I think, secondly, timing is everything. If you get it at the right time, even with a smaller company, you can have an incredible pop and reputation build that happens. So I think, sometimes it does work out. But again, 100 crores, I would say, is the bare minimum you need to be
absolutely.
realistic.
I mean, that's what merchant bankers say. Generally, if you go to them and say you want to list, you should have at least 100 crores and a potential 1,000 crores in market cap. A question for you is, and I'll follow the same thing with Neeraj, is how do the investors look at when they know that a bulk of the investors will be going out after an IPO? I mean, in your case, I know perhaps that was not the case, but generally you have the existing investors go out. How do the incoming investors, which is the retail public, how do they view such a situation?
Though we don't experience this particular challenge at the time of IPO, the existing investor were not exiting. But based on my experience and while discussing with merchant bankers at that time, I believe it is more important the reason which you communicate to the potential investors that why existing investors are looking for an exit. If there are certain rationale for that, logical reason for that, and your business potential is intact, and potential investor believes in you, your management in your businesses, I think it doesn't matter to the public at large or investor at large. But yes, if there are other reasons which you fail to explain to the potential investor, it is considered as a red flag.
It is going on. And Neeraj, what would be your reaction?
No, I think in the US very clearly, investors expect a private equity investor to exit.
Okay, so it's normal.
Yeah, it's normal. I mean, whether it's 2 years or 3 years, and what is the nature of exit that happens? Obviously, if you got a reasonably high stake, which Warburg did in our case, then I think there was concern about, will they dump it or will a lot of it sell? And, fortunately, Warburg had the reputation of doing things in a classy manner, and they did that too. So I think it wasn't there. But, you did get asked the question that, are they looking to sell, and what will happen to your stock if they do? And so I think there are those sort of considerations that are there. But, in general, there it's expected that the private equity or VC guy would sell in next few years. And so they're more concerned about what the management does as opposed to what the investor is doing.
Right. And in both your cases, you had a pre-life and post after the listing. How is life post facto, the listing? I mean, does it change? Does your outlook change? How do you educate your employees on what to do and what not to do as a public company? Do you go ahead and tell them that, during the time when the results are being announced, please don't talk about this, please don't talk about that, or don't sell your stock at that point? How did all those things come into play?
I think post-IPO, the business remains the same, but compliances has increased. You've been scrutinized every quarter. So, you actually have to focus a lot on your performance. And that focus is more on numbers than anything else. So you need to have, different set of people in a company to focus and take care of those issues. Whereas the top management and the entrepreneur, specifically the person who actually started and is driving, who is sitting on the driving seat, should not get into all those things and should focus on the business. So more or less the life remains the same, situation remains the same. Only change come in place is that compliances which have increased, and you have to actually explain everything to your potential investor. And I believe the biggest drawback that you are exposed to your competitors. So all of your strategies and all of your moves on quarter basis, in fact, all internal information, whether you want to share with them or not, they know it. So that really becomes difficult to, plan and strategize your business specifically if you are at our growth trajectory.
I mean, how did you educate your employees on what to share and what not to share from an insider information perspective?
See, there is a code of conduct for all the employees. So, it's a job of company secretary and other people who are taking care of compliances. They've been, trained. In fact, that's the case in private companies as well. So insider information can go out of company, whether you are listed or not to listed. But that is job of those people who take care of, to educating employee. That's not a big challenge as such. The bigger challenge is that you are now exposed to this, investor and competitors, and that's the big challenge.
So Neeraj, in your case, how did you go about educating the employees on what to do, what not to do, what to share, what not to share, and so on? I mean, the usual.
No, we again had a very elaborate program where we had to go through a lot of employee training at multiple levels on everything from disclosure and confidentiality and whistleblowing and again a lot of accounting considerations. Everything had to be. We spent a lot of time on training people, and I think one of the things was very clear that if we were explicitly communicating to people that if this happened, someone's going to jail. Okay, and I also was very clear with people, I'm not going to jail. So, if you do something wrong, I'm going to find you, and you're going to jail. So I think that was very, very clear that the rules were laid out, and we were very, very clear about it. I think by and large, I think people followed everything. On stock sale as well, we couldn't have had that issue because there was one broker who was entrusted with the challenge of selling all our options. And I think more importantly, that person was informed of the blackouts. So once or twice when it could have happened inadvertently, the broker immediately called and said, look, I don't think you can do it now. Do you know that you can't do it now? And that person backed off and said, yeah, you're right. I don't think I should do it now. So I think we had controls even at that level that it couldn't have happened. So I think that worked. Other aspects of changing of life, the question you asked was that, I think when you are conscious of your numbers every quarter, in all honesty, it does put some short-term orientation into things as well. So you are, earlier you would be perhaps 80% of the time focused on long-term and 20% on short-term. Right. It becomes closer to 50-50. One example I would give you is look at the whole effect on Forex changes on the performance of our company and hedges and all that kind of stuff. When the volatility started in the dollar rupee is in 2008-2009 timeframe. From 50 to 68. Well, I mean, but those days it was not 50 to 68. It was more like 50 to 40, 55 to 45 and varying in that range. But, clearly Forex has been more volatile the last 5 or 6 years compared to, say, the 50 years before that. And I think unfortunately, every quarter we were spending inordinate amount of time figuring out what would our numbers be because it wasn't as straightforward, because Forex would determine a lot of what your performance would be, which is out of your control. So I think stuff like that, you'll be worried about a lot more.
How does it feel if you are still invested in the company? I know probably you can say this better. How does it feel getting up every morning, reading the newspaper and saying, oh, my wealth has gone up by so much and my wealth has gone down by so much? How is that feeling?
I think I don't really look at my wealth, so I don't look at the stock prices so closely. More important is the business, how the business is taking shape every day. Being a first-generation entrepreneur, what excites me more is, my business and the way the business is growing more than anything else. So for me, perhaps I'm not the right person to comment on this. I never actually focus on that. As long as your business is doing good, you are on the right path. You are on the way to wealth creation.
Don't worry about those morning numbers.
Yeah, no, not at all. Never.
Neeraj, what about
there is no point, in fact.
Well, people in our company had a very simple program on the spreadsheet where they entered their options. They had a direct feed coming into that spreadsheet from the market price, and they could stare at the screen. I've even seen a screensaver where they could stare at the screen and say, well, this is what I'm worth today. So I think, were people keeping track of it? Absolutely. I think I knew what my stock price was every day, so I don't think that was something I could get out of. But at the same time, I think you realize that it's a very humbling experience being public as well, because there are times we thought we did phenomenally in a quarter and our stock price went down, and other times we thought we were doing okay and the stock price went up. So you just realize, look, a lot of this is not under your control, and Pramod's very right. At the end of the day, you can worry about things you can make a difference to, so just go out and build a great company and leave it to some outside forces to figure it out. So I think
to determine what.
Yeah, exactly. You just after a while, you just say, look, this is not in my control. What I can control, I'm going to influence and work on that. So.
Right. I think charm of stock price remains only for a year after listing. Yeah. Whereas post that you start focusing more on your business, because that actually drives your stock price.
Right. Sandeep, would you like to ask the gentleman anything on the legal side?
Yeah. So I'd like to understand not so much the legal perspective, but how you structurally moved from a large, both of you are still reasonably large before you listed. So besides your, the obvious things, insider trading controls and corporate governance standards, how did you need to evolve as an organization besides the obvious points of complying with the law?
See, in our case, initially my business was in multiple entities. So, in 2002 and 2003, around that time, we started, consolidating the business in one entity, because that is very important, the first thing. Otherwise, a lot of related party transactions. And then we started, putting things in place, started complying with the regular compliances, which is very important to start with. If you really want to make a company which you would like to take to the public, so your process should start almost 4-5 years in advance, and you should start complying with all the rules, regulation, filing, etc. And then, best way what we did in our case, we appoint we appointed a lawyer, and we appointed a merchant banker to do internal due diligence before, because, being entrepreneurs, many times you don't know that you have committed too many mistakes unknowingly, not knowingly, but you are not complied with all the rules and regulations of the various, authorities. Once you do that, once the things are in place, then you prepare a checklist that these are the compliances you need to follow. Once you are through with that process, then you are ready. Then it hardly makes a difference. Have good people in place, have a good company secretary, and a couple of people in legal department who can take care of these all compliances, filing, regulatory aspects, closely, and have the system and checklist in place. I think this is how actually we went. It took around 3 years to me, in fact, to bring all things in place in a manner which can be, perhaps filed to SEBI.
My personal experience is these days, all entrepreneurs have a compliance trigger every day while they work. Yeah. Every day there is a compliance trigger on the way you're working, and sometimes it's not possible to have your lawyers by your side all the time advising you. So personally, I've started getting the feeling that it is better to learn a lot and be educated about compliance, even if you're not a public listed company, even for private listed companies, because the compliances even for private limited companies have grown in proportions over the years. I mean, one wrong move in TDS is enough to send you back a couple of paces, So, there is every day there is a compliance trigger that gets activated as you work, and therefore the best way to do that is to get it embedded within your work life. Neeraj, how would you respond?
Yeah, I think for us, we discussed going public about, I would say, roughly 18 months before we actually did. And it was very clear that we have to start operating like a public company at least 4 quarters before we went public. So we started, whether it was compliance or performance management or everything, we started behaving like a public company 4 quarters before and started having drills and everything. So that from that perspective, I think there is no real option to being, being totally prepared. I think the other very important aspect in our case was that given that we were listing abroad, we also strengthened our finance and legal team enormously. So we got a new CFO who was a global citizen who had dealt with issues in acquisitions or public listings abroad. So we had to get somebody like that because none of us had experienced that before. So I think having one person in the team who knows what the game is, I think it's very important. And I think on the legal side as well, getting a general counsel and advisors who were able to deal with new situations, which at least from our perspective was very important.
So from a Q&A perspective,
yeah, anybody in the audience?
Public market specific, this is the right time.
I have a question. Let's say if a company is eligible for criteria for a public issue, whether it is a right thing to go directly straight away to the public issue route, or to PE funding, and how, if through PE funding, what is the better route? Because ultimately, the exit route asked by the PE is through public issue. So why not to go initially public issue? How the company will be advantaged in going through PE?
I'm sure the gentleman will be able to answer, but largely it depends upon what is the level at which you want to go public. You can't go public at very small levels. Can you?
Yeah, I think the size is there, and if you have to be at a certain minimum size, and if you've crossed that size, then I think, yeah, there's a real option. You have to look at market timing in some level. At some level, is there an appetite for a company of your kinds in the public market? You also have to look at both the options from the perspective of are they available and are they the right ones for your company. So there is a choice to be made. But as you said, you just need to get past a minimum threshold level, both in terms of numbers as well as how you're running your company to be able to feel comfortable with it.
And if you are ready for an IPO, I think validation of valuation is very important. Yeah. So if you can get private equity, and in fact, anchor routes validate your valuation. So either anchor period will validate your valuation, or else if you go for some third party and place some stake and take the company public, it actually validates your valuation, and it also ensures that all the things are in place because third party is investing in company.
And a very, very important third point is I think it's a very different beast being an entrepreneur compared to a more process-driven organization. I mean, if you're 1,000 employees, 5,000 employees, you can't run a company like an entrepreneur. And I think a private equity investment will enable you to transition. They will handhold you from moving into a owner of a company to a more process-driven organization. And I don't think a public listing would make the transition smooth. It'll make it quite ugly, I think.
This foreign listing is specific to any sector, or it's open for all sectors?
Is the foreign listing open to any sector or open to everything?
Yeah, so it's open to all sectors except, for instance, if it's prohibited or something, or if it's only 24%, it'll get capped to the FDI limit. Okay. So it's subject to the FDI limit of that sector. That is assuming you have foreign investment. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you need, but also you need to, you can't simply list. You need to raise capital. If you want to plainly list abroad, you can't do that today. There's a Sahu committee which is kind of given its recommendations. So level 3 only.
Yeah. If you look at the long list that appears in Economic Times of the listed companies, many times you wonder, many of those companies wouldn't pass your scrutiny of going public, but they are public limited.
I think we've gone through that phase, the early 1990s. We have, by the way, we have the distinction of having the largest number of listed companies in the world. And out of whatever 9,000 listed companies, I presume barely 2,000 would barely be breathing, leave alone kind of performing well.
So how do they manage that?
I mean, they don't manage anything. They don't make any filings. They're basically kind of zombies. Probably half of them are zombies. In fact, we did extensive work on the regional stock exchange. We still have around 17 or 18 regional stock exchanges. And you have actually thousands of companies which are listed there. And I was on a committee which looked at that. And very few of those companies are, in fact, surviving today. So how to kind of get out the zombie companies, and even more important, how do you get the zombie exchanges out of the system? And it's been I can tell you, for the last 20 years, SEBI has been trying very hard to get the zombie companies and exchanges out. But it's always a kind of a battle of optics, because as soon as you say that there should be forced delisting, some investor, investor body will say that, no, how can you take away listing? But they have been zombies for 20 years. I mean, better to clean up the system, but I think the optics are different from reality sometimes.
Actually, in many cases of listings in India, you have seen just before the listing, or in some cases like SKS, after the listing, skeletons have tumbled out of the closet. So how do you, I don't know, can you prevent this at all? How do you detect it? And should I repeat? I've seen that in some cases of listings, just before the listing or just immediately after the listing, like in the case of SKS Microfinance, some skeletons do tumble out of the closet. So is there any strategy to prevent this? And if this is detected, what do you do?
No, so I mean, that goes with the territory. But being a listed entity, obviously the scrutiny is much higher. Your obligations are much higher. Exchanges will come after you. SEBI comes after you. So I think it's a risky business committing fraud. If you made misstatements in the prospectus, I think you're looking at serious trouble. But if it's just kind of a downturn, or if it's a bubble, you listed at a good time and prices have fallen 70%, and that's really nobody's fault. And a lot of the problem which we face today is not just skeletons, but I mean, SKS is an example. It's not as if there's fraud in SKS. It's just that the business model failed because of regulatory kind of supervening circumstances. Their neck is online.
Fantastic. Thanks. So we should probably go grab some coffee, come back. We're going to have 2 more entrepreneur stories, fantastic M&A stories. In fact, one of them is a serial entrepreneur. He's been through this twice. And we have a bunch of Q&A. So this is meant to be more of a peer-to-peer session. So let's grab some coffee and come back in 10 minutes and for these 2 final, great M&A stories. Thank you very much. Into the specific questions once we are done with the 2 M&A stories that we are going to hear about right now. Thank you.
Yeah, Sandeep, I'll ask.
This is the last segment, so we Yeah, I will have my colleague introduce them formally and then he will take on their story.
Mr. Ajay Bohora is the co-founder and CEO of Credila. He started his career with Tata Exports Limited and then went to New York to pursue his MBA. After his MBA, he worked in the field of finance at various positions for 6 years at MetLife Insurance Company in the New York office. He is also a certified